Thank you all for joining us, and welcome to ABNY's first Power Breakfast of 2022. I'm so delighted to have an old friend of ABNY, our State Comptroller, Tom DiNapoli, here with us today. Tom was in the headlines recently for something pretty remarkable. As his tenure as State Comptroller approached 15 years, he surpassed former Governor Nelson Rockefeller to become the 5th longest serving executive office leader in our state's history. Now, the number 1 spot was held by another New York State Comptroller, the late great Arthur Levitt Sr., who held the post for 24 years alongside Governor Rockefeller for much of it. Tom, we're trying to figure out if you got another 10 years of Albany in you, and we wish you luck in that. But anyway, we're thrilled to have you here. Now, longevity is a virtue in and of itself, but what I find extraordinary is that after 15 years spent auditing agencies, watchdogging the budget, not exactly things that make you friends and that make you popular, everybody still likes and respects Tom DiNapoli. He has managed to do the tough job of watching over hundreds of billions of dollars in pension assets and state budgets without drama, without ego, with an open and honest manner, something very rare in politics today. In our ABNY community, this ethic, Tom's ethic, is something worth celebrating. I'll introduce the Comptroller in just a moment so he can update us on what he sees on the economic horizon as we enter the budget season. But first, I want to take a moment to recognize the tragic loss of 2 NYPD officers. Officer Wilbert Mora, age 27, and Officer Jason Rivera, just 22, gave their lives responding to a domestic violence call last month. Our entire city felt the pain of losing these 2 young men. I think we are all moved to see the thousands of officers paying their respects along 5th Avenue last week to Officer Rivera, a scene that will be repeated today as Officer Mora is laid to rest, and I know our Comptroller will be there later this morning. Our community's prayers are with the families of our fallen officers and all the members of the wider NYPD family in mourning today for these heroes who gave their lives to protect our city, our fellow citizens, and us. I know you all feel our city is coming through a difficult couple of months, and I know that many people on this Zoom have told me that they and their families had COVID since December. But as we look out on the horizon, we can also see signs of optimism. First, while we're back on Zoom today, and hope to be in person, we hope to be in person pretty soon as the numbers and the cases are dropping fast, back to pre-surge levels. The subways are back in full service. Our hospital system held strong through the worst of it. Our schools, our businesses, and our city stayed open. We've gotten through this time in large part because so many people were vaccinated. Over 95% of adults in the city have gotten at least 1 shot. That same goes for 60% of school-age kids who only became eligible this fall. Credit goes to our hospital system, our not-for-profits, and our city and state officials. And look, it's clear vaccination saves lives, and I just would encourage anybody who has not to think long and hard and investigate it. It seemed and it's something we in our ABNY community feel strongly about. So now on to today's event. 2 weeks ago, Governor Hochul unveiled this year's state budget boosted by rebounding tax revenue and federal aid. We saw big investments in aid to local governments, affordable housing reforms, new infrastructure proposals like the Interborough Express, a new transit line connecting Brooklyn and Queens. This year, the budget battles won't be about austerity. They're going to be about confronting our biggest problems, restoring public safety, protecting public health, helping businesses get through this period of economic turmoil. For 15 years, Comptroller Tom DiNapoli has been a leading voice against waste, fraud, and corruption in the public sector. As we enter this year's budget process, his role is making sure we don't waste the potential of this moment and that our one-time infusion of federal aid is used to make lasting change. To give you a sense of how Tom leverages his office, just look at the last month or so. He identified millions of dollars that went unspent on programs and services for seniors, so that money could be reinvested. Using his role as a trustee of state pensions, he's taken on big data firms for shielding their political spending from shareholders, and he just oversaw a multi-billion-dollar commitment of pension assets to companies that drive climate solutions. Tom takes on the nitty-gritty and the big ideas. Today he's come to ABNY to update us on the city's changing workforce, our uneven recovery, and how we approach the 3rd year of the pandemic. It's a delight to have him here. Ladies and gentlemen, our Comptroller, Tom, Zoom over to you.
Stephen, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Thank you also for framing an optimistic tone in terms of where we're at and more importantly, where we're headed. I appreciate the invitation to be with the ABNY audience, and appreciate the cooperation of the ABNY team. And thank you also for moving up our timing on this so that I could get to Officer Moore's funeral. I'm grateful for that. So first of all, let me thank everyone on the call and everyone affiliated with ABNY for your collective efforts to keep New York City moving forward. That's been the great legacy and tradition of this organization, more important now than ever for ABNY to serve as a catalyst for growth and for a stronger New York. 2 years ago, around this time, who could have imagined that we'd still be in the throes of a global pandemic that would cause such an upheaval for our city, for our state, for the nation, for the entire human family. But as Stephen alluded to, as we gather today, Omicron appears to be quickly receding in New York City and across the state. It's what the experts had anticipated. It seems to be coming to pass. So we can have real hope that from a public health perspective, hopefully from an economic perspective as well, we're going to be seeing significant improvement in the weeks and months to come. Certainly to date, New York City's economic recovery from the depths of the pandemic remains relatively slow when we compare it to how the rest of New York State has been performing, and when you look at some of the national economic trends. The recovery has been uneven. Some New Yorkers have had tremendous growth in their incomes and savings. Others have had to rely on an unprecedented level of government aid and support. And just as we have seen New York City's recovery start to speed up in the second half of last year, now we see some new potential clouds on the horizon, if I could put it that way, in the form of lingering inflation and volatility as well in the financial markets. Uncertainty in our economic recovery has been the only certainty during this time. And that requires a cautious and prudent approach to planning and to budgeting. I'll focus my comments on the current state of the state and city economies and budgets, give you a first look at a set of city-focused reports that my office is releasing that spotlight the budgetary and operating challenges facing New York City. So let's talk a little bit more about where we're at with the recovery. New York State unemployment for December 2021 was 6.2%, down from 8.7% a year ago, certainly way down, depending on which region you looked at in the state, the 15 to 20% unemployment that we were facing back in April of 2020. It's obviously reflecting a significant improvement. We are not back to pre-pandemic job levels, though. We are now at about recovering 63% of the 2 million or so jobs that we lost statewide, so we still have a ways to go. In the 5 boroughs of New York City, the recovery is continuing, but the pace is a bit slower compared to the statewide numbers. Entering the pandemic, the city saw robust job growth, leading overall statewide economic strength. We always said, right, the city is the economic engine for the state. Well, as you all know so well, the pandemic hit New York City early, fast, and hard. Citywide unemployment is still at 8.8% back in December, better than the 12% unemployment rate of December of 2020, but still lagging state and national rates. To put a finer point on the dichotomy between the city and state recoveries, looking at New York outside of the city, the unemployment rate in December was 4.3%, close to the pre-pandemic statewide rate of 3.9%. When we look at New York City in terms of recovered jobs, it's a lower percentage, so 57% recovery of the a little bit shy of 1 million jobs that were lost in the city. Again, an improvement, but not back to where we were pre-pandemic and lagging the percentage of recovery that we see statewide. So my office has continuously looked over the course of the pandemic and monitoring the economic and budgetary impacts of COVID-19 on the city. We've tracked the hits and the misses of large federal aid programs to businesses and individuals. We looked at the Paycheck Protection Program, economic injury disaster loans, restaurant revitalization, shuttered venues, operators, rent relief, extended unemployment. We consistently focused on industries and neighborhoods in New York City that have been hit hardest and are struggling to come back. just one area in particular where we've had some focus is what's been happening in the Bronx. The unemployment rate remains double digit there, over 11%. So the reports highlight many sectors and communities which have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. Our April 2021 report on the New York City tourism industry noted that in 2020, 43.7 million fewer visitors came to the city, and the industry's overall economic impact fell by $60 billion, with close to 90,000 jobs lost. Last month, we put out a second follow-up report on 3 industries that we tracked early in the pandemic that still remain well behind pre-pandemic levels, broadly defined as what we call the 3 Rs: restaurant, retail, and recreation sectors. We keep an ongoing look at the sector, such important industries to the economy, and still a struggle, certainly compared to other sectors that have started to recover. That most recent report found that as of November of last year, there were close to 170,000 fewer jobs in the 3 Rs than 2 years ago. The job losses in this sector accounted for 41% of total private sector jobs lost in the city during the pandemic. So all that questions of, when will day trippers come back, foreign travel and foreign visitors is a whole nother question. Broadway, opening and closing and fits and starts depending on what's happening with COVID. One of the bright spots has been our friends in the film and TV production area have been getting back to their business. And, that's actually, just as an aside, that whole area of entertainment, motion pictures, I think there's room to grow there. Construction jobs, entertainment professional jobs might be an area for us to continue to encourage from a state and city perspective. Despite the challenges underlying the economy, the revenue picture for the city and for the state is better than had been initially projected. You go back to what we were thinking a year ago, even less than that, and still very concerned about budget gaps and shortfalls. Very different picture right now. Much of this improved budget picture is driven by the unprecedented amount of federal funding that we've received or will be receiving. The American Rescue Plan provided an additional historic infusion of federal resources to the state and to localities. $12.6 billion to the state, $5.9 billion to New York City, $4.9 billion to local governments outside of the city, well more than $6 billion for the MTA and counting there. The $1.2 trillion Federal Infrastructure and Jobs Act also includes significant funding for the city and the state. State revenue is up. 2 weeks ago, we reported in our December cash report that tax receipts for the first 9 months of the state fiscal year exceeded the enacted budget forecast, as it has done for several months. It was well over $2 billion ahead of updated revenue projections. Against the backdrop of the state's economy doing better than expected, revenue, and that's a combination of the economy picking up, the revenue from the increased taxes that were part of this year's budget. As I said, the big game changer has been that infusion of federal funding. So with that all as a backdrop, Governor Hochul, as you know, proposed the state budget earlier this month. The proposed executive budget makes critical new investments in healthcare, the environment, schools, higher ed, housing, energy, and infrastructure. Importantly, the executive budget forecasts surpluses every year through fiscal year 2026-27. The first time in many years that the state's financial plan forecast has been imbalanced for that length of time. That is certainly welcome news. Additionally, the governor has also said she's going to build up our reserves to 15% of state operating fund spending, very much in line with repeated calls that I have made that we need to do a better job to build up our rainy day funds and reserves to be prepared for that next downturn whenever it may come. In contrast, the city's uneven recovery has led to volatile revenue for the city. Direct federal aid and federal support for individuals and businesses acted as a bulwark for city finances and led to better than expected revenues in city fiscal year 2021, even as bad news from property taxes led to the first decline in the city's largest revenue source in over 20 years. This has given the city opportunities to set aside funds to manage uncertainty and support recovery leverage federal funds to put money into one-time recovery programs, and build reserves back. Yet despite a forecasted surplus of $965 million so far in the city fiscal year 2022, again, based largely on the receipt of $750 million in federal aid in the current year, the city missed opportunities to set aside funds and find efficiencies. The latest financial plan released by the prior administration still anticipated budget gaps to average $2.6 billion in the plan out years. But we have a new administration, so new opportunities will emerge. Last month, the city's tentative property tax rolls was released and unexpectedly suggested market values will rise a little over 8% in fiscal year 2023. That's certainly reflecting some welcome news. If that number holds, property tax revenues would exceed 2021 levels, the previous peak. That wasn't expected to happen until after fiscal year 2025 in the city's latest financial plan. It could offer an immediate source of relief for the city's budget gaps and another opportunity to set aside funds for the future. The city still has the chance to leverage this and other unforeseen good news and set aside funds should the economic recovery experience more difficult terrain going forward. So my office has identified risks, including recurring spending funded with one-time federal money that could bring the city's out-year budget gaps to more than $5 billion. Mayor Adams has taken an important step to address these risks, initiating a program to eliminate the gap, PEG, P-E-G, the PEG program, of 3% for nearly all agencies while requesting that city agencies avoid direct service reduction. This is a best practice that we've recommended that the city return to in the past. This effort will help agencies prioritize what needs to be done and helps create the space for budgetary flexibility. Throughout the pandemic, I've called for both the state and city to be prudent with their use of federal funding and unexpected revenue upside. Relying on good economic news coming or more federal funding to manage budgets is not a smart long-term plan. We have to do a better job of thinking all of this through. The benefits of a prudent approach are becoming more obvious with each passing day. Inflation is worrying policymakers and investors and throwing a new and serious headwind into our economic trajectory. Markets have started the year wobbly, if I could use that phrase, and some indices are near correction levels. Of course, the past couple of days, we've seen a big increase. So again, the volatility is something we'll all have to get used to. The mood in Washington is problematic as well. There seems to be, at least for the moment, less of an appetite to provide additional boost to city and states and aid programs for businesses and individuals. This uncertain environment highlights the importance of a cautious approach to budgeting and maintaining flexibility while focusing on the core services necessary to keep the city desirable. New York City's recovery relies on its ability to deliver basic services like education and public safety. At the same time, the city will need to provide these services and manage spikes in demand for additional services like mental health and homelessness without interruption. Bringing those challenges to light is necessary to addressing them. And just as my office has focused on recent economic and revenue challenges, we're now highlighting the challenges the city faces in ensuring that there are high quality services for those who visit, work, and live in New York City. So today we're releasing a set of reports and agency briefs to better inform all stakeholders on the city's budgetary and operating challenges. And all of this is on our website. So after this morning, please go there. In brief, first, let me tell you about our new report on the impact of the pandemic on New York City's municipal workforce, again, available on our website. We owe a great debt of gratitude to the city workers who continue to provide essential city services during this period under difficult conditions. Our report shows the COVID-19 pandemic brought an end to years of growth in the city's workforce, which rose 13.3% over 8 years through fiscal year 2020 to reach over 300,440 full-time employees. That excludes Health and Hospitals Corporation and NYCHA. The city's pre-pandemic hiring was largely driven by new teachers and support staff for expanded pre-K and for public safety. Since fiscal year 2020, however, the city's workforce has shrunk by over 16,600 employees, an overall decline of 5.5%, that brings its total workforce to the lowest level in 5 years. In some city agencies, the declines, which are concentrated in public safety, education, and health and welfare positions, are well above that citywide 5.5% average. In fact, 10 agencies, the decline is over 9%. On one hand, the staffing decline gives the city a chance to re-examine its workforce, restructure programs with greater efficiency, and achieve that 3% cost savings directed by Mayor Adams. However, it could adversely impact the quality and consistency of some public services and programs. Among the 10 agencies that saw the largest decline in headcount, the Department of Correction and the Department of Investigation have noted staffing declines were impacting its ability to provide certain services. Others cited redirecting employees from lower demand activities that are likely to return as we get into more of the recovery mode. During the height of the pandemic, attrition was lower than average, but hiring was frozen for many positions, which led to a workforce decline in fiscal year 2021. Since mid-year 2021, however, the attrition has risen, an issue plaguing employers across the country, compounding workforce decline. Hiring isn't keeping up either. Civil service exam schedules to broaden the potential workforce have been affected by COVID. The city is not likely to be able to close the workforce gap and reach its budgetary target of over 309,000 employees by June 30th of this year. Reduced staffing also means the city could see $1 billion in savings this fiscal year. But reduced staffing compounded by COVID-related absences led city overtime to exceed $1 billion the first half of the year compared to $385 million last year. Most of these savings would come from the Department of Education, where headcount losses have accelerated in the current school year, just as the city was trying to expand education services. These types of questions regarding alignment of staffing within reasonable budget constraints face many city agencies. The answers will be key, a very key component of a successful and sustainable fiscal and economic recovery. Agencies will be faced with making choices while managing shifting demand for municipal services, from COVID-related services and emergency response back to core services to support people and businesses in the recovery from the pandemic. This could create even more challenges for certain agencies facing short staffing. To provide more specific information, we prepared a series of agency briefs. So again, on the website, this is just a sample as to what it looks like. So we're looking at a number of city agencies to really drill down on the challenges that we see that are there. Department of Education, the impact of remote learning, falling enrollment, budget risk for special ed services. Department of Homeless Services, the end of the eviction moratorium, rising agency costs. Health and Hospitals Corporation, launching new initiatives to expand healthcare in underserved communities. NYPD, significant overtime risk for 2022, as we're all concerned about the surge in shooting, budget implications with regard to police reform and anti-gun violence programs. Department of Sanitation, high overtime, a decline in staffing. The Department of Environmental Protection, water and sewer user rates rising again and preparing for weather emergencies. The Housing Authority, declining rent collection, growing deficits, capital needs. Department of Transportation, what's the future of Vision Zero, maintenance and repair catch up, accessing federal infrastructure funds. These operational and budgetary issues will also require the city to keep dollars available to manage any unexpected revenue downside, avoid new spending initiatives without identifying recurring revenue to sustain them. It's great to have new ideas for spending, but you must have the revenue to back up that spending. As I mentioned earlier, the city has created quite a few risks for itself in its use of federal money for one-time federal money for recurring programs. So to track the trends there, this is just a blow up of what's on the website. We've created what we call a Fiscal Cliff tool to identify sources and uses for city programs that are not fully funded during the remaining years of the city's financial plan, which goes through fiscal year 2025. The agencies analyzed in this tool make up 90% of city expenses. Agencies include Department of Education, uniformed agencies, Health and Social Services, and the Mayor's Office. City and federal funded expenses are also identified in the tool, so the user can find those areas of spending most at risk due to the exhaustion of federal COVID-19 relief funding. Identified cliffs could impact services for residents, including expanded education programs, housing assistance, mental health and healthcare initiatives, among others. So we're trying to make it useful, user-friendly. So for our state to reach its full potential, we need a safe, welcoming, healthy, and economically vibrant New York City that works for all of its residents. We all know the importance of municipal services. We have to make our residents feel safe, help them stay healthy, keep streets clean, educate our kids if we want New York City to thrive. We also need to take care of the most vulnerable families. Sharp declines in the city's workforce, combined with uncertain revenue to pay for programs as federal aid winds down, may test the city's ability to deliver high-quality services, just as the city is trying to ensure a healthy and broad recovery. I encourage all city and state leaders to be flexible in their budgeting and prioritize the core operations of New York City. Essentially, the city budget needs to be as resilient as its people and its businesses. Rest assured, my office will continue to shine the light on our pressing economic and budget challenges to encourage a thoughtful discussion. Again, I thank all of you for what you continue to do individually and collectively to advocate for a stronger New York City. For our state to succeed, we need New York City to succeed. So I look forward to continuing to partner with ABNY members as we move beyond COVID-19 and work to build a successful, inclusive recovery. Thank you all, and Stephen, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Tom. That was, I gotta say, impressive, particularly in its depth. I was hoping to ask a few questions, and we have some from our people on the Zoom as well. In terms of the mayor's program to eliminate the gap and the target of 3%, I'd like to ask, like, do you think is that a wise percentage to hit? It doesn't also strike me culturally that for the last period of time, the city has really been asked to take out a pencil and cut budget. Budgets have seemed to have grown extensively over the last period of time. So it's a cultural shift in terms of how to approach budgets. But two, do you see this as achievable? And how long does it take to achieve that kind of savings?
I think it is achievable. I guess we could quibble on the number, but I think 3% is a reasonable place to start. And what I think is an important cultural shift is that the mayor is saying it right out of the box, right? He's not waiting to see if the out-year gaps become worse, or just banking on good news coming in and saying, okay, we dodged something there. Instead, he's saying, I recognize that we have these out-year gaps. Again, it's different than what we have in the state's financial plan. And he's saying we have to get ahead of it. I also think it creates the opportunity, given the new leadership at the agency level, right? All the new commissioners and department heads that he's bringing in, it gives them a realistic goal. And particularly as they start to look at core mission, what are the essential services, as they start to staff up again, how can they more effectively deploy personnel and do it in a way to realize efficiencies? I think the timing is right, because very often the tendency as government is just to add, right, rather than say, okay, what is it that we really need to deliver the services that is essential to the mission of our agency. So how long it will take? I mean, that's probably a different question. I don't necessarily have an opinion on the length of it, but I think it's a realistic goal. I think the fact that he set that goal from the very beginning, you have new leadership in agencies this will be embedded in their culture and their approach to budgeting. I think it's smart, because look, the city, again, as I said in my remarks, the concern is that what the mayor was left with were some great ideas for spending without the long-term revenue to back it all up. Some of these initiatives clearly were dependent on the federal money, which is not forever.
By the way, are there agencies that you see? You mentioned a bunch. You mentioned overtime in the PD, and you mentioned overtime in DOE. Are there agencies where you think 3% actually isn't enough? Where you think we could actually? Are there agencies you look at and think, oh, I can tell how bloated this is from the outside, and it seems a logical place to start?
I don't want to start picking and choosing on agencies. I'm not sure that's look. The Department of Education is a very big expense area, and especially given the challenge of suggested new programs, clearly an inability to meet the staffing levels that have been initially projected, concern about how to manage rising costs with regard to special education services. Again, not an issue unique to New York City, but has significance in New York City. You know, I would think that the Department of Education would be a very logical place. And look, you know, with all the concern about public safety, homelessness, you know, those may be some of the examples of agencies where, you know, and in some of those areas, the mayor's already said they're exempted from, you know, that 3%. So, you know, it's the 3%, I think, is a worthy goal, but the goal is to not approach this with a, you know, with a cleaver, but rather with a scalpel. And I think the mayor has set out the right strategy on that.
We obviously have a new mayor, and you talk about a new approach, fiscal approach. We also have a new governor, a new-ish governor. The tone seems to have changed politically across our city and state about cooperation. And I just asked, does that have practical benefits to you? Like, do you feel that as a result, the way the conversation has changed, that there are more opportunities to either be better as a government or achieve kind of better fiscal approach?
I mean, the short answer is yes, and I guess the answer is based on a lot of hope, right? There's still time to tell how this will all play out. But you know, I think everybody would agree the contentious relationship, particularly between the city and state leadership during the pandemic, was very frustrating, right? It was in the middle of an emergency, and there was too much one-upmanship and lack of coordination. And somehow we got through it. So I guess that's the good news and credit to everybody else. But you know, there's no doubt that the mayor and the governor certainly are off to a good start in terms of relationship. The city and state, I mean, the city is very dependent on what the state does. I mean, there's so much decision-making with regard to taxes and policy that are not controlled by the city itself. I mean, that's a kind of a perennial argument as to whether the city should have more control over some of this, but the city is a creation of the state. So the state, under our system, not just in New York, the state is the dominant level of government. And we're also familiar with the fact that historically there's always some tension between leadership at the state level and the city level. So actually, I think it's very different for many, many years now to have relatively new executives in each spot that are starting out with a very positive personal relationship. They've obviously been talking a lot and meeting a lot. Look, the real proof of it will be as we navigate through the state legislative session that just is kicking off. How will this all play out? How will the final version of the state budget impact on the city? You know, many years past, the decisions are made at the state level. While there's some additional support in some areas, there are also decisions made that take some money away from the city. The advantage we have now, Stephen, is that there's a lot of money out there. It's always easier to keep everybody kind of on the same page or relatively happy when you have more money. So let's hope that you know, the optimism will be well placed when we conclude the legislative session this year and the budget process.
Can I ask in that spirit, saying there's a lot of there's money out there at this time? I'll ask a very kind of pointed question. Do you think people obviously care a lot about the cost of taking a subway? And do you think it's realistic to think that we can keep the fares of the MTA where they are for some time?
Well, I mean, look, it's a judgment call. The fares were supposed to go up the end of last year. They deferred it, and now it looks like, you know, the increase will be deferred for the balance of this year. Look, at the end of the day, the MTA funding picture is still precarious. Thank God for the federal money, and hats off to our congressional delegation and the advantage of having Chuck Schumer as Senate Majority Leader has really delivered, you know, billions that have helped to keep the MTA afloat. The greater New York City area, not just the 5 boroughs, but the whole downstate region is so dependent on the MTA and the transportation system. And so much of the MTA's revenue is tied to fares, right? Over 50% of the transit revenues are from the fare box. So ultimately, we need ridership to return. So that's obviously a complex combination of workplaces reopening, people coming back to the city, commuters feeling and subway riders feeling safe on the subways from a public safety point of view, from a quality of life point of view in terms of the homeless issue and how that's impacted, you know, whether you're talking about Penn Station, Grand Central, or the subways. So, there's a lot there to get people back to using the transit system. And at some point, the reality is we can't defer, forever what had been viewed as a responsible strategy to have periodic increases in the fares to keep the whole system sustainable. So, beyond this year, I don't know that it can be deferred. If the argument to keep the fare where it's at will help to encourage people to come back because it's more affordable, okay, let's see if that in fact is the case. But we saw ridership picking up again, and then Omicron came in, the numbers started going back down again. So, it's still, for the other reasons I just outlined, a lot of people have concern about using public transit, and that's something we're all going to have to do a better job of addressing.
I will say to the earlier question, it's at night. While the challenges are real and complicated, I'd say it's reassuring to see government on the city and state level trying to work together on the same issues, because they're complicated, a lot of constituencies, and they're hard things to change behavior and keep people safe. So
have to find common ground, and you're absolutely right. Yes.
So we talked a little about the COVID impact on the subways. Has COVID impacted your pension fund obligations in a material way?
Well, I'll answer that in a couple ways. I mean, when COVID first hit in March, right? We value our fund March 31st. It's tied to the state fiscal year. So the markets tanked, right? Within 2 weeks, we were having a really strong year, and then everything went down. So we actually had a slight decrease in 2020. Then everything came roaring back. I mean, we certainly know one of the areas of strength in New York City has been Wall Street activity and the taxes that we derive from that. But in terms of market performance, we actually then, from March of 2021, had our strongest year ever, over 33% return. So in terms of economic impact, and I could tell you, although we haven't said it out loud yet, so you all that are listening don't repeat it. It looks like our December 31st number, we're up to about 279 billion, about a little over 4.5% for the quarter positive return. So from the performance point of view, we're in pretty good shape. In terms of what did it mean for retirement activity, we did have a spike in retirements, which I think were somewhat related to COVID, particularly at the end of 2021. Particularly in police and fire. And again, because of the budget uncertainty, hiring was slowed down. So we probably over the past year have had a net more retirements than hiring. So long-term, you like to see more of a balance with active employees. So, now the pace, particularly at the local government level, is starting to pick up with regard to hiring. So the good news, Stephen, is that our fund is over 99% funded. So we're one of the best funded public pension plans in the country. And one of the strengths that gives us is it enables us to navigate through challenging times, just as we've gone through. So we're in good shape. Certainly has had an impact, but I think we're getting through it.
Thank you. I got a question from Betsy Seidman, the head of from the Citizens Budget Commission. And it's, what does it mean to conduct a racial equity audit? How are they conducted? And what does your office do if the findings show discrimination?
Well, so, in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing, our organization, like I think every organization, has had to, really look a lot harder at questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's obviously an internal examination, but also external in terms of looking at the work that we do and how could we advance this agenda. So in terms of the racial equity audits, what Betsy's referring to, and thank you, Betsy, for the question, has to do with our pension fund work, with engaging with corporations we invest in to make sure they're doing right by these issues. So in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing, you saw many corporations, corporate leaders speak to their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yet we found, from our perspective, based on our analysis, press reports, and so on, some of those same corporations that were making verbal commitments seem to be falling short in terms of the reality. So we put a proposal, first of all, at Amazon last year. Amazon's obviously become a bigger part of all of our lives. there have been a lot of stories about disparate treatment of workers of color, particularly in the warehouse operations, some of the community impacts of their business operations. So we had a shareholder proposal at Amazon to require an independent racial equity audit. And what we mean by that is for the company not to just do an internal review themselves, but to engage with an independent third party. And there are consultants that provide these kind of services that really look at workplace practices, policies, procedures, business activity and impact on communities, and really give an independent view about how the corporation is performing on these issues. So we fell short in the first vote at Amazon. We actually got 44% support, which is pretty significant for first-time shareholder proposal. So we're going back to Amazon. We've identified another, I think, 4 companies that were also doing a similar proposal. And obviously the hope is that the independent audit will either validate that in fact everything is going well, or will point out areas where the corporation can do a better job of meeting their own goals on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Since we're approaching 9:15, I have a final question. You were elected to office at the age of 18. As we said, the first ever 18-year-old elected to office in the state of New York. ABNY has a big young professionals network that has been really significant to us in terms of their engagement in the city. So first, like, do you encourage people to was it helpful to start that young? Like you've done this for a really long time. And do you have any advice for somebody who's setting out early in their career, early in their college career for that matter, to say like, go into public office? Because it seems rather like entering a bit of a mosh pit from as somebody who reads a lot about government and participates from the civic side.
Well, thank you for the question, Stephen. Thank you for not mentioning what year it was that I was elected as the first 18-year-old in New York State. It was a while ago. Look, I came of age in the late 60s, early 70s. There was a lot going on then, and young people were very involved in all of the social movements and causes. More civil rights, go down a long list. And actually the year that I ran was, so I will date myself, was the first year that 18 to 21-year-olds were allowed to vote in the country, right? The big issue was the Vietnam War, the draft, and you could be drafted and killed, but you couldn't vote. So there was a change, and it was a good change. And I had been active in school issues. I went to school board meetings. I live in Long Island, so we elect our Board of Education trustees, and I didn't like some of the things that were happening. And I felt, one way to make change is going to meetings. Another way is to try to occupy the seats of influence. Under an elected democratic system, you have the opportunity. So, I guess beginning maybe it was a little bit of just an attempt to spark interest and debate. A bunch of us got together, and since I was going locally to college to Hofstra, I was chosen as the candidate. So I was still in high school when all this happened. And, for me, having that first experience of people actually having confidence in me and giving me a chance, right? It was very novel for a teenager to run for anything. I grew up in a very conservative area, and I had long hair then and campaigned in blue jeans, knocking on doors. And I think one reason why I've stayed in public service all these years is that initial proof that if you put yourself out there, are not afraid to take some hits for it, but have a program and offer something, people might actually believe in you and take a chance. So that contributes to my optimism, and I'm glad I had that first beginning working on school issues, because they're less they're not really partisan issues or political in the same sense. And I would say for young people, sometimes what I hear is people feel that if you're not connected, you're not wealthy. It's a very intimidating process, to run for office, or not even running for office, let's say working in a government position. And my experience has been that it really wasn't all that, at the end of the day, all that intimidating. I mean, I didn't have any particular family connections, but my family were all Republicans, so when I got involved with partisan politics, they couldn't vote for me in Democratic primaries, so I didn't have anything special going into it other than the fact that I wanted to make a difference. And I was very fortunate that people were willing to give me a chance repeatedly over the years. So look, we're in a time of incredible challenge. And the reality is, for our system to work, we need the infusion and the vitality of the next generation. So certainly I encourage younger people not to feel daunted by what it means to get involved in politics. You're not going to win every battle. You're not going to win every race. I haven't won every race that I've been in. I've won a lot more than I've lost. But if you really are there to make a difference, and if you're sincere about presenting who you are and in a meaningful way, what it is you want to do to better your community, the opportunities really are boundless. And we need that infusion of younger people. So anybody on your call that wants to be involved, please do. And that could include running for office. And anybody that wants to talk to me offline about what my perspective is or how I might suggest that they do that, feel free to, Stephen, to have them be in touch with me. Yeah, I have no regrets about starting early. And I did 10 years of the private sector, and I love that too. But to have the opportunity to serve in elective office for these many years has given me great meaning in my life and great satisfaction that I'm making a difference.
Thank you, Tom. First, thanks for bringing up the 60s, especially in a week where Joni Mitchell and Neil Young are driving the public conversation to say that it's still helpful to people with long hair and knocking on doors. And second, thank you for the seriousness of the report and kind of looking at the budget of the city, because we're a group that believes in fiscal responsibility because we're here for the long term. We're not moving to Florida. And so, we're really grateful for your service for so long. We're grateful for the seriousness and honestly for the way you approach public service and what a great partner you are. So we're grateful for you. Thank you. And we hope to have you back again soon.
Great. Thank you, Stephen, and thanks to your entire team.